Disclaimer: this channel provides news and commentary for educational purposes. We do not promote violence or misinformation. Content may include fair use material under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act. Zambia is boiling. Citizens are furious. ECL's family is under fire. And President HH is caught right in the middle. What started as mourning has erupted into outrage. Stay tuned as we uncover what's really going on. The Zambian people have spoken, and their message is loud and clear. In a shocking twist following the late President Edgar Lungu's memorial, Zambians are expressing deep frustration with both ECL's family and President Hakainde Hichilema. What happened? Why are PF leaders being warned? And what does this mean for Zambia's political future? Movie camera. In this exclusive video, we break down the emotional reactions from the Zambian public, what the Lungu family did that upset citizens, how President HH is now being pulled into the storm, whether the Patriotic Front (PF) can survive the fallout. Speaking head, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with the public's outrage? Is this a turning point in Zambia's politics? Pushpin subscribe now for real-time African political updates, honest analysis, and insider reports. Comprehensive analysis of Zambia's political crisis following Edgar Lungu's death. The emotional reactions from the Zambian public. The death of former Zambian President Edgar Lungu on June 5, 2025, at the age of 68, has triggered a complex and intense emotional response across Zambia. As a polarizing yet influential figure who led the country from 2015 to 2021, Lungu's passing has elicited a spectrum of reactions, ranging from profound grief to frustration and anger. Zambia, a deeply Christian nation, traditionally observes periods of mourning with solemnity, often marked by national unity, public gatherings, and tributes such as radio stations playing gospel music, as was seen in the wake of Lungu's death. However, the public's grief has been overshadowed by a contentious dispute over his funeral arrangements involving the Lungu family, the Patriotic Front (PF), and the government led by President Hakainde Hichilema. The standoff has left many Zambians feeling confused and cheated of the opportunity to mourn their former leader in a dignified manner. Social media platforms, particularly X, reflect a polarized public sentiment. Some citizens express deep sorrow for Lungu, viewing him as a leader who, despite his flaws, connected with ordinary Zambians through his grassroots appeal and policies like infrastructure development. Others, however, are frustrated by the politicization of his death, with posts on X describing the situation as a circus and criticizing both the Lungu family and the government for turning a national moment of reflection into a public spectacle. The declaration of a 7-day national mourning period by the government, juxtaposed with a separate mourning period announced by the PF, has further confused citizens, as has the delay in repatriating Lungu's body from South Africa. This uncertainty has led to emotional fatigue, with some Zambians expressing a desire for closure and others feeling that the ongoing conflict disrespects Lungu's legacy. The emotional toll is compounded by Zambia's broader socio-political context. Economic challenges, including high inflation and unemployment under Hichilema's administration, have already strained public patience. Lungu's death, as a significant national event, has become a focal point for these frustrations, with some citizens using the funeral dispute to voice broader discontent with governance and political rivalries. The public's emotional reactions thus reflect not only personal grief, but also a collective sense of unease about Zambia's political stability and unity. What the Lungu family did that upset citizens. The Lungu family's actions following Edgar Lungu's death have been a significant source of public upset, primarily due to their decision to delay the repatriation of his body from South Africa, where he passed away while receiving medical treatment. The family, supported by their lawyer Makibi Zulu, halted the planned return of Lungu's remains on at least 2 occasions, citing unresolved disputes with the Zambian government over the funeral arrangements. Specifically, they demanded control over the funeral program, including who should preside over the state funeral, and publicly referenced Lungu's alleged dying wish that President Hichilema should not be anywhere near his body. This statement, widely reported in Zambian and international media, was perceived by many as inflammatory and unnecessarily personal, given the history of political rivalry between Lungu and Hichilema. The family's insistence on dictating the terms of the funeral, including their initial refusal to allow the government to take the lead in organizing a state funeral, has been seen as politicizing a moment that many Zambians wanted to be apolitical and unified. The public dispute has led to logistical confusion, with the government declaring June 22, 2025 as the date for the state funeral, only for the family to delay proceedings by keeping Lungu's body in South Africa. This has caused practical issues, such as uncertainty about when and where public mourning events would occur, leaving citizens unable to pay their respects in an organized manner. For example, planned memorial services in Lusaka and other cities were disrupted, leading to public frustration expressed on platforms like X, where users describe the situation as a tug-of-war that dishonors Lungu's memory. Additionally, the family's accusations that the government contributed to Lungu's death by restricting his travel for medical treatment treatment have further inflamed tensions. They claim that Lungu was banned from leaving Zambia for years, which delayed his access to specialized care for achalasia, a rare esophageal condition. While these claims resonate with Lungu's supporters, they have been met with skepticism by others, who see them as an attempt to deflect blame and rally political support. The public nature of these accusations, rather than private negotiations, has been criticized as divisive, with some citizens arguing that the family is exploiting Lungu's death for political leverage rather than focusing on a dignified farewell. How President HH is now being pulled into the storm. President Hakainde Hichilema has been thrust into the center of the controversy surrounding Lungu's funeral, largely due to the Lungu family's and PF's actions, which have framed him as a central antagonist. The family's public declaration of Lungu's wish to exclude Hichilema from the funeral proceedings has placed the president in a delicate position, forcing him to navigate a crisis that blends personal rivalry with national responsibility. The accusation that Hichilema's administration restricted Lungu's travel, thereby contributing to his death, has further escalated tensions. The PF and Lungu's supporters allege that the government's decision to block Lungu's international travel for medical checkups, stemming from his 2024 ban from running for office due to constitutional term limits and subsequent political restrictions, delayed critical treatment. These claims, though denied by government spokesperson Cornelius Mwitwa, have gained traction among opposition supporters, fueling protests in South Africa under the banner "Suffering Lungu Even in Death." Hichilema's history with Lungu adds complexity to the situation. In 2017, Hichilema was arrested and charged with treason under Lungu's administration, an event that deepened their personal and political animosity. This history has led some to perceive Hichilema's involvement in the funeral arrangements as insincere or politically motivated. The government's initial insistence on controlling the funeral, including sending envoys to South Africa to negotiate with the Lungu family, was seen by some as an attempt to assert dominance over the PF and Lungu's legacy. However, the government's eventual agreement to allow Hichilema to preside over the state funeral on June 22, 2025, following negotiations, suggests an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Public sentiment, as reflected on X and in media reports, is divided. Some Zambians criticize Hichilema for what they see as a lack of empathy and flexibility, arguing that he should have ceded more control to the family to avoid controversy. Others support his administration's position, viewing the family's demands as unreasonable and politically motivated. The government's broader policies, including economic reforms that have led to public discontent, have also been drawn into the narrative, with critics using the funeral dispute to highlight perceived authoritarian tendencies. Hichilema's ability to navigate this crisis will likely influence his public image and the UPND's prospects in the 2026 elections. Whether the Patriotic Front (PF) can survive the fallout. The Patriotic Front faces an existential crisis following Edgar Lungu's death, as he was a central figure in maintaining the party's relevance despite its internal divisions. The PF has been fractured since at least October 2023, when a controversial party conference led to a split between two factions, one led by Lungu and later Given Labinda, and another by Miles Sampa. Lungu's death exacerbates this leadership vacuum, as he was a unifying force and a key figure in opposition coalitions like the United Kwacha Alliance and the Tons Alliance, which aimed to challenge Hichilema's UPND in the 2026 elections. Without Lungu, the PF struggles to resolve its internal conflicts and present a cohesive front. The party's survival depends on several factors. First, its ability to select a new leader who can command the same level of loyalty and public appeal as Lungu is critical. Potential candidates like Labinda or Sampa face challenges in uniting the party, as their factions have competing visions and loyalties. Second, the PF must capitalize on public discontent with Hichilema's economic policies, such as the removal of fuel subsidies and mining sector reforms, which have caused economic hardship for many Zambians. However, the funeral controversy has damaged the PF's image, with some citizens viewing its role in the dispute as opportunistic and divisive. Former Vice President Inange Waina's call to preserve the Tons Alliance suggests an awareness of the need for unity, but the party's ability to rally behind a single leader and strategy remains uncertain. Analysts argue that Lungu's death could lead to a further decline in the PF's influence, potentially paving the way for single-party dominance by the UPND. The PF's reliance on Lungu's charisma and grassroots support made it vulnerable, and his absence may accelerate the defection of supporters to other opposition groups or even the UPND. However, if the PF can leverage the public's frustration with the funeral dispute and broader economic challenges, it could regain momentum. The 2026 elections will be a critical test, but the current fallout suggests that the PF's survival is precarious without significant restructuring and leadership renewal. Is this a turning point in Zambia's politics? The controversy surrounding Edgar Lungu's death and funeral arrangements has the potential to be a pivotal moment in Zambia's political landscape, as it exposes deep divisions and raises questions about the country's democratic institutions and political culture. Several factors suggest that this could be a turning point. Weakening of the opposition. Lungu's death significantly weakens the PF and the broader opposition, which has struggled to mount a unified challenge against Hichilema's UPND. The PF's internal fractures, combined with the loss of Lungu's unifying presence, could lead to a prolonged period of UPND dominance, especially if the opposition opposition fails to coalesce around a new leader. This shift could alter Zambia's political balance, potentially moving it toward a de facto one-party state, a scenario that some analysts warn could undermine democratic competition. Legal and institutional gaps. The dispute has highlighted the absence of clear legal protocols for handling the funerals of former presidents. Constitutional lawyer John Sangwa has pointed out that Zambia's constitution and laws do not explicitly outline procedures for such events, leading to the current impasse. This could prompt legislative reforms to establish guidelines, which would be a significant development in strengthening Zambia's institutional framework. Public discontent and political polarization. The funeral controversy has become a lightning rod for broader public dissatisfaction with Hichilema's administration, particularly its economic policies and perceived democratic backsliding. Protests in South Africa and critical posts on X reflect a growing sentiment that Hichilema's government is authoritarian, a narrative that could galvanize opposition support if a new leader emerges. Conversely, if Hichilema navigates the crisis effectively, it could bolster his image as a unifying leader, strengthening his position ahead of 2026. Test of democratic resilience. The public nature of the dispute, coupled with accusations of government overreach and opposition opportunism, tests Zambia's democratic resilience. The country has a history of peaceful transitions of power, but the current crisis highlights the fragility of political unity in the face of personal rivalries and institutional weaknesses. How the government and opposition handle the fallout will shape public trust in democratic processes. While the immediate impact of Lungu's death may weaken the opposition, it also presents an opportunity for new political forces to emerge. If the PF or other opposition groups can channel public frustration into a coherent platform, this moment could spark a realignment of Zambia's political landscape. However, without such a development, the UPND's dominance may solidify, marking a significant shift in the country's political trajectory. Do you agree with the public's outrage? The public's outrage over the handling of Edgar Lungu's funeral is both understandable and complex, reflecting a mix of genuine grief, political frustration, and cultural expectations. From one perspective, the outrage is justified. Zambians expected a dignified and unified mourning process for a former president, in line with the country's Christian values and tradition of honoring national leaders. The Lungu family's decision to delay the repatriation of his body and their public accusations against Hichilema have disrupted this process, creating confusion and preventing citizens from paying their respects in an organized manner. This has been particularly painful for Lungu supporters, who feel that his legacy is being disrespected by both the family's actions and the government's response. Focused analysis of Zambia's political landscape post-Edgar Lungu's death. Whether the Patriotic Front (PF) can survive the fallout. The death of former President Edgar Lungu on June 5, 2025 has plunged the Patriotic Front (PF), Zambia's main opposition party, into a precarious position, raising serious questions about its survival. Lungu, who led Zambia from 2015 to 2021, was not only the PF's most prominent figure, but also a unifying force despite the party's internal divisions. His passing, combined with the public controversy over his funeral arrangements, has intensified existing fractures within the PF, threatening its cohesion and relevance as the 2026 general elections approach. To assess whether the PF can survive this fallout, several factors must be considered: leadership succession, internal unity, public perception, and the broader political context. Leadership vacuum and succession challenges. The PF has been grappling with internal divisions since at least October 2023, when a disputed party conference resulted in two rival factions, one led by Lungu and later given Lubinda, and another by Miles Sampa. Lungu's death leaves a significant leadership vacuum, as his charisma and grassroots appeal were central to maintaining the party's visibility and mobilizing supporters. Without him, the PF faces the daunting task of selecting a new leader who can bridge factional divides and command similar loyalty. Neither Lubinda nor Sampa has demonstrated the ability to unify the party, with Sampa's faction accused of being opportunistic and Lubinda struggling to assert authority over dissenting members. Other potential leaders, such as former ministers like Chishimba Kambwili or Raphael Nakasinda, lack the national stature to fill Lungu's shoes. The absence of a clear succession plan exacerbates the challenge. Lungu's dominance within the PF meant that no obvious heir was groomed, and the party's constitution does not provide a streamlined process for resolving leadership disputes. Posts on X reflect skepticism about the PF's ability to regroup, with some users predicting that factionalism will lead to further defections to rival opposition parties or even to the ruling United Party for National Development (UPND). The PF's survival hinges on its ability to hold a credible leadership election or consensus-building process before the 2026 elections, but the current fallout suggests that this will be a contentious and potentially destabilizing endeavor. Internal unity and coalition dynamics. The PF's internal disunity is compounded by its reliance on opposition coalitions, such as the United Kwacha Alliance and the Tons Alliance, to challenge President Hakainde Hichilema's UPND. Lungu was a key figure in these alliances, leveraging his influence to negotiate partnerships with smaller parties. His death weakens the PF's bargaining power within these coalitions, as other leaders may view the party as diminished and seek to assert dominance. Former Vice President Inange Waina's call to preserve the Tons Alliance underscores the importance of maintaining strengthening opposition unity. But without Lungu's gravitas, the PF risks being sidelined or absorbed by stronger coalition partners. The funeral controversy has further strained internal unity. The PF's decision to align with the Lungu family's demands, including their accusations against the government, has alienated some moderate members who view the party's actions as opportunistic and divisive. For instance, the PF's announcement of a separate mourning period, distinct from the government's 7-day national mourning, confused supporters and drew criticism for politicizing Lungu's death. If the PF cannot reconcile its factions and present a unified strategy, it risks losing credibility and support among its base, particularly in urban strongholds like Lusaka and the Copperbelt. Public perception and political capital. The PF's handling of the funeral dispute has damaged its public image, with some Zambians perceiving the party as exploiting Lungu's death for political gain. Social media sentiment on X highlights frustration with the PF's role in prolonging the standoff over Lungu's body, with users describing the situation as a circus that disrespects Lungu's legacy. This negative perception could erode the PF's support, especially among swing voters who value stability and unity during national crises. However, the PF retains significant political capital due to public discontent with Hichilema's economic policies, such as the removal of fuel subsidies, mining sector reforms, and persistent inflation. Lungu's supporters, particularly in urban and mining regions, view him as a leader who prioritized infrastructure and social programs, despite criticisms of economic mismanagement during his tenure. The PF could leverage this nostalgia and capitalize on accusations that Hichilema's government restricted Lungu's medical travel, which some believe contributed to his death. Protests in South Africa under the banner "Suffering Lungu, Even in Death" indicate that the PF still has a mobilized base, but translating this into electoral success requires overcoming internal divisions and restoring public trust. Broader political context. The broader political environment in Zambia favors the UPND, which has consolidated power since Hichilema's 2021 victory. The PF's weakened state post-Lungu could lead to a period of single-party dominance, a scenario that political analysts warn could undermine Zambia's democratic competition. However, the PF's survival is not impossible. If the party can resolve its leadership crisis and align with other opposition groups, it could exploit public frustration with economic challenges and perceptions of UPND authoritarianism, such as restrictions on opposition activities. The PF's historical resilience, having survived electoral losses and internal strife, suggests that it has the potential to regroup, but the current fallout represents its most severe test yet. In conclusion, the PF's survival is uncertain but not unattainable. Its ability to navigate the leadership vacuum, unify its factions, restore public trust, and leverage economic discontent will determine its fate. Without swift and strategic action, the PF risks fragmentation or irrelevance, potentially ceding ground to the UPND or emerging opposition forces. Is this a turning point in Zambia's politics? The death of Edgar Lungu and the ensuing controversy over his funeral arrangements have the potential to mark a significant turning point in Zambia's political landscape. This moment exposes deep-seated divisions, challenges institutional norms, and reshapes the balance of power between the ruling UPND and the opposition. Several dimensions suggest that this crisis could redefine Zambia's political trajectory, influencing governance, opposition dynamics, and public trust in democratic processes. Weakening of the opposition. Lungu's death significantly weakens the PF and the broader opposition, which has struggled to present a unified challenge to Hichilema's UPND since the 2021 elections. As a charismatic and influential figure, Lungu was instrumental in rallying opposition supporters and negotiating coalitions like the United Kwacha Alliance and Tons Alliance. His absence creates a leadership void that could fragment the opposition, reducing its ability to compete effectively in the 2026 elections. The PF's internal divisions, now exacerbated by Lungu's death, may lead to defections or the emergence of new opposition parties, further diluting the anti-UPND vote. This weakening of the opposition could usher in a period of UPND dominance, potentially resembling a de facto one-party state. While Zambia has a history of competitive multi-party democracy, the UPND's consolidation of power through electoral victories, control of state institutions, and economic reforms positions it to capitalize on the opposition's disarray. However, single-party dominance risks undermining democratic accountability, as seen in other African contexts, and could fuel public discontent if economic challenges persist. Institutional and legal implications. The funeral dispute has exposed significant gaps in Zambia's institutional framework, particularly the lack of clear legal protocols for handling the funerals of former presidents. Constitutional lawyer John Sangwa has highlighted that neither the Zambian constitution nor existing laws provide explicit guidelines for such events, leading to the current standoff between the Lungu family, the PF, and the government. This ambiguity has allowed personal rivalries and political agendas to dominate, undermining national unity during a period of mourning. The crisis could prompt legislative reforms to establish standardized procedures for state funerals, ensuring that future events are handled with clarity and dignity. Such reforms would strengthen Zambia's institutional resilience, addressing a critical oversight in its governance framework. Additionally, the public nature of the dispute has raised questions about the balance between state authority and individual/family rights, potentially sparking broader debates about constitutional protections and government accountability. Public discontent and political polarization. The controversy has become a lightning rod for broader public dissatisfaction with Hichilema's administration, amplifying existing political polarization. Economic challenges, including high inflation, unemployment, and the cost of living crisis, have already strained public patience. The funeral dispute, particularly accusations that the government restricted Lungu's medical travel, has provided opposition supporters with a narrative to criticize Hichilema's leadership. Protests in South Africa and critical posts on X reflect a growing perception among some Zambians that the UPND is authoritarian, a sentiment reinforced by reports of restrictions on opposition activities and media freedoms. This polarization could galvanize opposition support if a new leader emerges to channel public frustration into a coherent platform. Conversely, if Hichilema navigates the crisis effectively by demonstrating empathy, facilitating a dignified funeral, and addressing economic concerns, he could strengthen his image as a unifying leader. The government's decision to allow Hichilema to preside over the state funeral on June 22, 2025, following negotiations with the Lungu family, is a step toward de-escalation, but public trust remains fragile. Democratic resilience and political culture. The crisis tests Zambia's democratic resilience, particularly its ability to manage political rivalries during moments of national significance. Zambia has a strong record of peaceful power transitions, as seen in 2011 and 2021, but the current dispute highlights the fragility of political unity when personal animosities dominate. The public feud between the Lungu family and Hichilema, rooted in their 2017 treason case and ongoing rivalry, underscores the need for a political culture that prioritizes national interest over personal grudges. The outcome of this crisis will shape public trust in democratic processes. If the government and opposition can resolve the dispute through dialogue and compromise, it could reinforce Zambia's democratic credentials. However, if the standoff escalates or is perceived as mishandled, it could erode confidence in state institutions and fuel political instability. The protests in South Africa and social media backlash suggest that public sentiment is volatile, making it critical for leaders to act with restraint and transparency. Potential for political realignment. While the immediate impact of Lungu's death weakens the opposition, it also creates opportunities for political realignment. New opposition leaders or parties could emerge to fill the void left by the PF struggles, potentially reshaping Zambia's political landscape. Alternatively, the UPND could seize this moment to broaden its support base by addressing public concerns and projecting inclusivity. The 2026 elections will be a critical juncture, with the funeral controversy likely to influence voter sentiment and party strategies. In conclusion, Lungu's death and the surrounding controversy have the potential to be a turning point in Zambia's politics. The weakening of the opposition, exposure of institutional gaps, amplification of public discontent, and test of democratic resilience all point to a moment of significant change. Whether this leads to UPND dominance, opposition renewal, or institutional reform depends on how leaders navigate the crisis and respond to public expectations. The coming months will be pivotal in determining Zambia's political trajectory.